Sidi Ali al-Jamal, one of the very interesting scholars of Morocco, he said that the food of the body comes from the earth, but the food of the soul comes from the heaven. So if you eat the food of the earth for your soul, it will corrupt it. And that it's the food, and he says the food of the soul is words. So revelation is the real sustenance of the soul. So when you are filling yourself with the words of men and the falsehoods of men, it's like junk food for the body. You're getting sick, so your soul will get sick. Whereas if you feed yourself with the spiritual nourishment of revelation, the soul will get well. قَدْ أَفْلَحَ مَنْ زَكَّاهَا. That he has success, the one who the soul, he grows the soul. Zakkaha, tazkiyah, purifies it, but it also means to grow. That's why the great souls are souls that kept growing. And then there's a beautiful word that comes from Latin, pusillanimous. Right? So you have magnanimous, which means animus is soul, magna is great. So a magnanimous person has a great soul. The pusillanimous person has a puny soul. So this is something that cultures recognize, the fact that we have words in different cultures to articulate these meanings. A petty person. In India, Gandhi was called Mahatma, right? The great soul. So all these cultures have this understanding that there are great souls and then there are puny souls. But Allah says that Allah has given us the ability to grow our souls. But if you feed it with the wrong food, you stunt it. If you feed it with the right food, it grows. And that's why they say Imam al-Ghazali, at the end of his life, his maqam was so exalted that he could not read books that men had written. He could only read the Quran and hadith. That was his maqam. And he was reading hadith because he was not if he was alive today, he'd probably be the greatest muhaddith alive. But at that time, he was not considered a muhaddith. His area of expertise was the usul al-fiqh in particular, and then obviously tazkiyah. But that's why he's been criticized by some for having these hadiths in the ihya. But most of them are hadith that are related to tazkiyah, and the ulama were much more easy on those type of hadith. And then he goes, وَنَزَّلْنَا مِنَ السَّمَاءِ مَاءً مُبَارَكًا. So look how it's so. This book is just so extraordinary because it goes heaven, earth, and now the meeting of the heaven and the earth, the water. So the water comes down to the earth and brings the earth to life. So that's a metaphor right there for revelation, that it's the nourishment, just as the heavens bring the water that brings forth the nourishment of the earth. It's the water of life, what they call it in the ancients called it fons vitae, right? The water of life. So again, all these cultures have these words that have these meanings because these are ancient truths that were brought by the prophetic traditions. And it's blessed water. فَأَنبَتْنَا بِهِ جَنَّاتٍ وَحَبَّ الْحَصِيدِ. So we brought forth all of these gardens and then حَبَّ الْحَصِيدِ, all these grains that are harvested. وَالنَّخْلَ بَاسِقَاتًا لَهَا طَلْعٌ نَضِيدٌ. And then the nakhil is such an amazing tree, the palm tree. And the fact that the dates are so central to the Arabian Peninsula, this was life and death for them, the date yields. And the amazing thing, dates will last for a very long time. You can eat them for a very long time. And then there's all these different things. They can be eaten at every stage. So this is a reminder, because the khitab is first and foremost to the Arabs. It's important to know that. The Arabs were given a special status in that it was revealed in their language, and then they had to convey it to other people. And this is why, although Islam is not an Arabian religion, and one of the tragedies of modern Islam is this kind of Arabization of a lot of cultures. That's not, that is, in fact, a lot of the Arabization is not even Arabic. So for instance, the robe is not an Arab dress. The robe is a Persian dress. The Prophet ﷺ wore, probably the closest thing to his dress is the way that Bengalis and Indians dress, with the izar, what they call lungi. And then he wore a qamis. And then the Libyan dress also, or the way they dress in Pakistan, because he wore sirwal, and then he had a qamis over it. But the robe was a Persian dress. And you can look in all the pictures of the ancient Persians, they're all wearing robes. So when the Arabs conquered Persia, they took on the dress of the aristocrats of Persia. That's where the robe comes from. But it's not native to the Arabs themselves. It would have been alien to them. But now it's become associated with the Arabs when it's actually Persian. And also the ghutra. The ghutra was not something any Sahabi wore. Ibn Umar said that the ghutra was doubt in the night, and something inappropriate for a man in the day. Because in the night it would make him look like a woman. They wouldn't know if it was a... But they didn't wear the ghutra. This was something adopted later. They wore a turban, the Arabs. And then also the other thing which is really important about the dress of the Prophet ﷺ, he dressed from different cultures. So he had a Roman Byzantine shirt, he had an Ethiopian shirt, he had very few clothes, but they were not of one culture. It was very interesting, because had they been, people might have said that's the sunnah, is to dress like that. But and then he wore a Yemeni jubba. He had a jubba from Yemen, made in Sana'a. They're very nice. It was a red and striped jubba. So he wore different clothes. But the hallmark of his religion is modesty. And that's why Al-Mawardi, in his amazing book on adab ad-dunya wa deen, or adab ad-deen wa dunya, he says, al-libas tabi'un lil-urf, that clothes should follow the place that you're in. They should not be alien. Muslims should not have alien clothes, because wherever Muslims went, they wanted to let people know we're not alien. This religion's not an alien religion. And also they indigenized their architecture. You'll never see Muslims in Andalusia building like Hindu architecture. Whereas in India, they built like Hindu architecture. In China, they look like Buddhist pagodas, the mosques. If you go to Turkey, they look like Byzantine churches, because they indigenized. We're not alien. You have your culture. Islam is not a culture. Islam is a sieve for culture. Islam purifies culture. It doesn't impose upon you an alien culture. It's a religion. It's a teaching. It has rites and rituals, and its sacred language is Arabic. But it doesn't have any culture. And so the Arabs, they have that special task of understanding their language. And we're all ala alayhim. Yani, almost all the Ajam, I mean, there are places where the Ajam have gotten to a very high level. We have like the Amazigh people, amazing in the Sus, these great Moroccan native peoples who know very often Arabic much better than the native speakers now, because they study it. And also you have great Persian scholars, you have great Indian and Pakistani scholars. I mean, some of the strongest Arab scholars today, especially in hadith tradition, come from India and Pakistan. So the language is accessible to everyone, the language, but the Arabs, still, it's their language. Even with all of their darija, when they learn Arabic, they have an advantage over the non-Arab. But they're also disadvantaged in some ways. because the fish is unaware of the water. So just like we don't think about air. So when you're an Ajami and you study Arabic, you can see things that the Arabs don't really see because they just learned it. Whereas a non-Arab, when they learn Arabic, they see all the patterns. That's why the great scholars of Arabic were Persians.